Farming food and fashion for a discerning world is serious business in Aotearoa, New Zealand. There are new opportunities everywhere just waiting for the open-minded. Sarah's Country shines a light on the matters that matter most. And here's your host, Sarah Perriam.
Kia ora and welcome to another episode of Sarah's Country's Opinion Maker, where every week we uncover some challenges within the primary sector that we can see through different lenses and different viewpoints to hopefully come to some outcomes, but also get an update on how they are progressing for a big and bright, beautiful future ahead for food and fibre here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The one industry that has produced a fantastic GDP result just recently following a major pandemic, and the adding of values and value to what has been a commodity for so many years. The wool industry has been one that has been divided in terms of its breed for some time, and it has left strong wool farmers now seeing their wool as a waste product that is being thrown into gullies and disposing of following the years of many working groups and roadmaps and action plans over the past 4 years since Minister O'Connor took up the hot seat of Minister for Agriculture. Everyone has been watching closely of the work that has been unfolding, and all credit to Damien in his response to funding requests from the wool industry to fix its demise to now a point where it is costing farmers across the country to shear their sheep for animal health reasons. We're talking a $1 to $2 per kilo price for strong wool since the peak of nearly $10 in mid-80s. Was not under my watch, he said, until he sees the end of this infighting and fragmented approach to what has unfolded over decades of growing, harvesting, scouring and selling what is really the world's most natural renewable fibre, and something that should have a bright horizon of boundless opportunities to capture. Because the globe is, as we know, switching from synthetic to natural consumerism. So why have we not been able to turn around wool? Just for a bit of background for those who do not follow it as closely. So what happened, a wool industry project action group known as PAG was formed, and years of chasing up a report was finally released in July last year, setting out a vision and action plan with 3 key recommendations. That has kick-started a discussion more deeply around a strong wool sector that can have a sustainable economic base once again. So, from that report in July 2020, another group was formed, the Strong Wool Action Group, known as SWAG, which has gone on to see the collaboration of 15 wool companies joining together with 17 red meat processors, one other wool company, a sheep milk company, Beef and Lamb New Zealand, and even Deer Industry New Zealand. They've been able to raise $750,000 amongst themselves, and topped up with a recent $2.8 million government fund from the Ministry for Primary Industries Sustainable Food and Fibres Fund. Right, so we're ready for action. Joining me now to kick off the Opinion Maker show, titled Fixing the Price of Strong Wool, What Are We Missing? To explain the work of SWAG behind the scenes that will propel the organisation to deliver on that vision of that report that was released last year, is Chief Executive Andy Caughey joining us now. Andy, thank you so much for your time. It is an interesting organisation to drive change with a lot of expectation maybe floating around the industry. So I'd love to start with why you took on the role of Chief Executive of this project, a bit about your background and why you find that the place we're in now is it actually does have a brighter horizon to turn around the mighty ship, which is the price of strong wool.
Good morning, Sarah. Thank you for the opportunity of presenting on behalf of the Strong Wool Action Group. This opportunity was presented to me towards the latter part of last year, and having just returned from living and residing in the United Kingdom, we were starting to see significant trends of consumers moving towards big changes in their consumption. And what's been fascinating is how COVID has driven this, accentuated even further with people working from home. They're much more conscious of how they're consuming products, but also the items that are surrounding them. So this was a unique opportunity to bring some of my expertise gained through working in the merino sector and bring a brand-focused approach with in an attempt to find solutions to consumer problems through strong wools.
One thing I want to start with is setting the scene of the decline of investment across the sector. There was the winding up of the wool board and the wool levy and the formation of what is now known as beef and lamb. That did see also a decline in investment in research and development into consumer-led products that strong wool could differentiate itself, not just predominantly in a wool carpet market. So therefore, how do we, from the work that you've done so far, start to reimagine that investment going forward from a sector that is now having to pay to shear its sheep?
I suppose it's not surprising that there has been such a decline in R&D investment. When you look at the reduction in stock numbers and the returns that growers are getting, there just isn't an abundance of money around. But it's not to say that there isn't a significant amount of innovation taking place. We've seen Ron's, who are in their stages of commercialising some of the ideas that they've been working on for the last 10 years. So that's going to bring in new uses, new applications for wool fibre. But it doesn't have to be industry applied. There's a lot of innovation taking place on farms and in design houses and in companies throughout the country. People who recognise the difficulty that strong wool growers are having and experiencing at the moment, and they're saying, we've got to find a solution. This is an amazing fibre, and we know that there's an inherent consumer demand there for sustainable products. So how can we build this bridge and reduce that gap so that consumers can buy products? So there's a lot of innovation taking place, and you've also seen some new entrants coming into the category of using strong wool for the first time. And it was only last week that we had Big Save announcing that they're going to integrate strong wool that's built into their sofas and into their mattresses, and they're willing to pay growers $4.50 a kg now, which is significantly higher than the current market. Their drive and determined to do this is they recognise that strong wool is a really important integral part of New Zealand agriculture, and they want to provide that sort of return to farmers now so that they maintain their breeding programs and maintain the sheep on the land. And then by offering new and innovative products into consumers in New Zealand, we can consume those products domestically.
Let's stay with on-farm profitability, because the race is on to ensure that our wool sheep breeds do not continuously decline as the rising trend of conversion to Wiltshire sheep as well as pine trees is literally with the end of this financial year. There's going to be some serious conversations happening around farm tables with rural accountants and bankers about letting go of the dream that wool will return and actually start for the short term to destock and move into these more profitable areas on farm. So my question to you is, how is SWAG working on that on-farm profitability story, rather in the meantime waiting for these particular contracts or attractiveness, as you said, of $4.50 plus?
Well, we've recently appointed Primary Purpose, who are undertaking work on the onshore initiatives that we are looking at to make our fibre fit, match fit and suit for purpose. And so we're looking at a number of different initiatives there, but these are all supply-driven initiatives. So actually they're not going to shift the dial significantly when it comes to demand. So demand has to be our key focus, and that's looking at market opportunities, market engagement, and connecting with brands who can incorporate strong wools into their product portfolio.
So when it's a 3-to-1 profit ratio of converting to trees versus staying in sheep farming, Andy, there's a huge amount of demand in a short amount of time to ensure that you have the wool clip there to meet that demand once you've created it, right?
Yes, so SWAG has three parts to our strategy, and the first part, which we led, was with IDEO, was to gain market insights, and this is where the demand drivers come from. Traditionally, the strong wool market has been supply driven. We've produced the fibre, we've shipped it offshore, and we haven't connected with brands or resonated with consumers. What we endeavoured to do through connecting with IDEO, who are a world-leading design thinking company, they look at consumer insights and consumer problems, and they link those products or link those problems back through to products. So the work that we were undertaking with IDEO was framed on the basis that it had to have global influence and it had to impact on volume and value, and would provide long-term sustained returns to growers by being disruptive in a category. So what we've come up with, IDEO completed the work in March. They identified significant business opportunities where we can bring disruption within a category by promoting the attributes of strong wool. These are the areas that we're going to be able to deliver an impact on demand. It's not going to happen on farm, it's going to happen in the marketplace.
One thing that does take a long time to change is on-farm behaviour and culture towards the treatment of product. We both, have been associated with the high levels of harvesting in our wool sheds of the merino clip, Andy, and know that the level of detail of our wool classes and our shearing contractors is towards the treatment of that going into some of these supply contracts. What work are you doing with the shearing contractors and the Wool Classes Association to, really upskill the level of quality and attention to detail that will be required in a market that's currently throwing the wool into gullies because it's worth nothing to them? So the attitude towards that fibre at the moment is at dire straits.
Yes, we have a collective responsibility as an industry. It's not put on the shoulders of any one particular group, but I think collectively we've got to take pride in the fibre and how it's presented and sent to the market. I was on a trip to mills in the United Kingdom back in 2019, and for the first time they had seen the price of English wools surpass that of New Zealand wools, and for them that was a reason for celebration. But that what they were attributing that to was that the levels of contamination and the inconsistency of the wool grading was inferior to what they were able to achieve out of English wool. And that's damage that will take a long time for us to repair. So we've got to be very aware that although our returns may be low at the moment, the actions of all of us before we put our wool up for sale will have an impact on our reputation and our ability to transact.
I'd like to know why that wool is even leaving our shores with, out from our scours and our processors and our exporters even allowing that detrimental effect to happen. What can we do to even stop that and put a minimum standard of what leaves this country, Andy, in place?
I think it's just increasing awareness of the implications of people's actions here and how it impacts way beyond our shores. There are no shortcuts. We have to do it properly and consistently, and all of us are participants in building up the reputation of New Zealand strongholds.
The really great one I enjoyed reading about was the New Zealand Farm Assurance Program coming on board, including wool. As Chair Rob Hewitt said, it's a no-brainer. You've got 6,000 sheep farmers already using the Farm Assurance Plan for their meat quality accreditation. So this is a positive step forward for that level of quality assurance that you need.
Yes, it is. And what it does, it brings in common industry standards. Consumers are increasingly looking for reassurance that their product is meeting certain industry standards, and it provides New Zealand strong wool with a point of differentiation and should help drive price differential within the marketplace and address some of the points that I was making just before about inferior product. If we're going to really embark on this journey of a quality assurance scheme, what we have to do is continue to raise the standards of how we're presenting that wool and treating it in the marketplace.
Okay, so the work of the Stronghold Action Group has a finite deadline. It is only in place for a set period of time to take forth that vision and put together an action plan, a strategy for what you may leave a more collaborative and coordinated industry afterwards, which is positive. There's, some over $3.5 million collectively with MPI funding and industry funding that you have to achieve that. So the biggest fail will be having a very high expectation of what comes out of the back of swag when it finishes. What would you like to leave the industry, sheep farmers listening to this program, Andy, that the steps will be left in place, the money will be well spent, and what does good look like in terms of collaborative governance and leadership from 2022 going forward?
Good question. So our plan, we're consistent with the outputs from the PAG report, and we've had three very clearly defined project streams. One is looking at the supply side, making sure that we're match fit. The second part, looking at the demand, the consumer insights, and making sure that we can build connections linked in with brands, and that we're resonating with consumers in the marketplace. And then the third part is putting in place enduring industry structures, and that's the area that we're about to embark on now. So structure follows strategy. We've got great clarity from the insights that we're gaining through the first two parts, the demand and supply side. And so we're now looking at the industry structures, looking at what are the requirements that we need to have an agile, dynamic strong wool industry, and then making sure that we recognise what are the areas that are working effectively now, and what are the areas that we don't need, that are superfluous to our requirements, so that we can provide clear messaging back to growers as to how we can work with them and making their industry suitable for the changes in the marketplace.
A simple question, is bringing back the wool board on the table?
Oh, that's a complicated response. We haven't started our discussion around the structural requirements for the industry yet. There is a lot of people who would like to have contributing discussions within what that structure or range of structures may be. So those will be conversations taking over the coming months.
And there's some agile business models that can be done differently, and we can learn from history and what didn't work too going forward, Andy, particularly around diversity of thinking. This is a real opportunity to get this right.
Yes, I think people reflect back at the times when the wool board was there. Was it the wool board that made it a profitable industry, or was it that we just didn't have competition from synthetics? So to go back and replicate a wool board isn't necessarily going to provide the same sort of results. I think we work in an industry now which can embrace technology, and we've got so many incredible ways of gaining access to information and knowledge and being able to share it. We shouldn't look to the past. We should look to the future and look at how we can embrace technology in a way that we can communicate very clearly to growers as to the direction that they should be taking.
Everything seems to be laying ahead of us, Andy, in terms of opportunity of a world of consumerism moving towards natural fibres, a more connected world with information transfer, the level of coordination now within the primary sector. It seems to be there's a lot of moral issues around how this coordinated approach will play out. So I wish you all the best, and thank you very much for standing up to the challenge and taking forth the reins of the Stronghold Action Group and the team that is involved behind that is a collaborative approach across the industry. Thank you so much, Andy Caughey there, Chief Executive of SWAG. Well, there are many things that boggle my brain about how the world we live in doesn't make sense, and certainly the topic of today's Opinion Maker is for sure the same. How can a natural fibre that has so many environmental sustainable credentials fail to be economically sustainable? Well, I've invited to the panel for the show titled Fixing the Price of Strong Wool and What Are We Missing? Tom O'Sullivan, Chairman of Campaign for Wool New Zealand, who in 2020 was for the first time in 3 generations of his family farm, it cost them more to shear their sheep than they earned from the price of the wool on the market. And Craig Smith, chairman of the National Council of Wool Interests and general manager for Devold New Zealand, a Norway wool clothing company, and also the man that actually had to hand a petition to our liberal, eco-conscious government to make New Zealanders aware of the microplastics getting into the sea from imported synthetic clothing and the volatile organic compound gases that our babies crawling around on synthetic carpet made from petrol cause to their health. This is where, if I could, I'd insert a face palm emoji. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. A way of being able to set the scene, actively involved and passionate about the topic that you live, breathe and bleed, to have a bit of a good, robust discussion with us about what to do about wool. Tom O'Sullivan and Craig Smith with me now. It is a bit of a buzzkill topic at a woolshed party, but one I invite our listeners to kick back and listen to, as we're going to dive into every aspect of the problem and scale of what we can do about this. Tom and Craig, now I had a bit of a look at, to give the scale of the problem. Kudos to someone who doesn't understand it. I understand in mid-80s, $10 a kilo. If that was on the trajectory of inflation, it should be at $30 a kilo. This is strong wool. And 2010, I read when the Meat and Wool Board, and they were campaigning for directorships on that, said that farming in the hill country is on its last legs and the trees are coming. 2010, 11 years ago, it was about $5.70 a kilo, and at inflationary levels should be about $6.90. And it currently is today, Craig, spot price of wool.
Maybe $2, maybe $2.20 clean a kilogram, and that's up from $1.
We've had a spike.
It has changed around. Come on, let's not be all negative about this, Sarah. I think what we're looking at is, let's not beat around the bush. The wool industry is in a really bad place. The strong wool industry is in a really, really bad place. There has been some improvements in that, but the world we live in now, I can only see an upside to this business that we're in now, and I keep telling people I'm one of the luckiest people in the world to be dealing with a fibre that everyone wants to copy, because it's got all these great benefits about the environmental sustainability, health, welfare. That's a solution to a lot of the issues that our country and the globe has got. We just need to start telling people and getting that across to the world.
Tom, can you give it from your position, Chairman of Campaign for Wool and third generation farming? I understand your grandfather paid off their farm with one wool check, and to now the size and scale of the problem we're facing, no wonder so many sheep farmers are looking at alternatives.
Yeah, well, Sarah, you're right in the fact that, the pinnacle probably for the wool industry in my 3 generations of farming sheep in New Zealand was my granddad did pay for his whole 1,600 acres in 1953 when it was the Korean wool boom, and it was known as, pound to pound back then. So Dad recalls as a young boy going out with his brothers and actually picking the wool off the barbed wire fence. It was so valuable at that stage. That was kind of the pinnacle. But sadly for strong wool, we've seen it in decline ever since, and particularly in the last few years or 10 years. To the point where, just to correct your intro there, it was actually 2019, my financial year for 2019. It was the first time ever in 3 generations that wool actually went from a revenue stream to a net cost. So it was an animal health cost. It was about $6,000 for my farm we've got 4,500 Perrendale ewes. And but sadly for the financial year ending November 2020, so last year, 12 months later, that cost to my business went from $6,000 to just under $30,000. And I know we're talking about $1 a kilo net. For every kilo we produce of strong wool, it's costing us, net cost, $1. So look, it's an absolute crisis, and I'm sure all of your listeners today, or my fellow farming colleagues, will be nodding their heads in disgust at the situation we've got. And I guess, I guess for me, there's going to be change in the industry, and I guess in some ways that's a positive. Change will happen. We either move and we get a new strategy and we move in a new positive direction for wool, which I honestly believe we will get it right. There's a massive opportunity. The other option is that farmers like me will get out of wool in the short term. And I guess that's the message that I'm giving to the industry strongly and firmly, that change is coming. Status quo is not an option. We either get this thing right or we farmers will get out of wool.
Craig, what worries me, and, I have to, for the record, say that I grew up in a fine wool shed in a jolly jumper from, as the shearing was going on, and the pristineness of that shed, the shed practices around the way that it was handled by the rousies, by the shearers, was taken with due care. What I worry about is the fact that the die-hard wool farmers that stay in there are the ones that really don't care about it at the point of harvest that we really need to turn it around.
And that's understandable too. But I think we need to go back a couple of steps. When the price of lamb, if we're looking at the quality of the wool, when lamb was up, on a trajectory that was going north, there was a lot of crossbreeding of sheep and the pure types of wool, whether the pure Romneys, the Perindales, or the Coopworth, the bill crossed with a down cross. So the quality of our wool has dropped off a little bit, but that preparation on farm, when it's it's costing you to shear the sheep, a lot of growers are saying, I'll either shear it myself and then just sweep it off the board, or I'll get the shearers in and only one shed hand and make them run around, and then we'll press it up. And we even have to look at the wool scours, and we're seeing the contamination that's coming through in the wool at the wool scours, whether it be hand pieces or press bars or jumpers or whatever it may be. And that number's actually going up, and that's a real concern, because even though we've got a wonderful product and the price is down, we've got to stay optimistic, and the price is going up. But you can imagine if one of those jumpers you were talking about, goes through the system, makes it through the scour, and then gets to a carding machine somewhere offshore and it's bright red. Well, now that wool is only bright red, and it's got flecks of red through it. So while it's, and Tom and I both agree on this, we know that we're in a really tough position right now, but now is the time for a real investment and we really need to take super, super care now, because I looked at data the other day. Wool was still less than 1% of the world's fabric. I think our petrochemical brothers are over 70%. 70% of the garments and fabrics out there now are made by petrol or petrochemicals. And wool I don't think it actually gets to 1%. So then you've got cottons, and then you've got the likes of tensiles and other manufactured fabrics. Wool's not even 1%. And we're really the only one that can actually put a hand up and say, we're the best in the market, best in breed when it comes to all those environmental things that our big brands are greenwashing everyone with. You've got brands going, we're using recycled plastic, and we're using recycled polyester. Yeah, but it's still polyester and it's still plastic. It doesn't change that, does it? So whereas wool is, everyone's striving to be what we are. And so that's always on our side, and that's really exciting. But and there's some really, really good things happening in the market. So, the on-farm side is one of them. So it's good.
I'm definitely not going to end this full show without leaving our audience being able to sleep well tonight. But Tom, I do need to go back a step. I had a beautiful gentleman of my Uncle John's era who was on the meat and wool board with him. And I said, right, well, I've got you here. What would you do about wool? And he looked at me in the eyes and he said, we should have never given away that levy. We should have never stopped the levy. Craig just sent there before about, the decline in investment in the wool industry. Is this just the glaringly obvious point in the history we will always go back to?
Well, I think, yes, the levy hasn't helped. But I guess if you go back, Sarah, the reason that we lost the levy and farmers voted it out was just through years and years of frustration at paying a lot of money to a lot of people who flew around the world but really did very little. And I say very little, probably just rested on their laurels as far as wool was selling. There was very little put into marketing. There was very little put into R&D. So I think generally, if I ask my dad, who's a retired sheep farmer, and many other guys I talk to my age, they talk about the appearance generation of farming, I think generally across the country, sheep farmers in New Zealand will be nodding and going, yeah, we were pissed off. We just, the money wasn't being used well. We couldn't see what was happening. So unfortunately, when the levy went out, it was really a vote of frustration more than anything. I guess my view is that, yes, a levy needs to come back in. But the very tricky thing we've got, as you guys were just discussing, is that we've got a situation now where it's uneconomic. We're actually losing money. It's costing us to produce wool. And what we potentially have to do is go out to farmers and say, well, look, we actually need you to invest in the industry. So not only are we losing, but then to go out and ask for a levy, we're actually asking them to pay. I feel confident, though, Sarah, that if we can put forward a true, proper transformational strategy for the strong wool industry, so a well-thought-out strategy that takes us from point A, which is today, which is completely unsustainable, it costs every farmer $1 a kilo, to a point somewhere in the future, and there's no silver bullet, maybe 5 to 10 years down the track, and a truly well-thought-out strategy on how we get from point A to point B, and what everyone, including farmers, needs to do to be part of that strategy. I'm quite prepared as campaign for wool chairman and also as a sheep farmer in New Zealand to go around the country and do road shows to ask farmers to get involved and pay a levy, but not until we have that strategy nailed and we can go down and present that to farmers to show them the direction we want to take the wool industry. So that's really a key piece of work that we at the Campaign for Wool are working on at the moment.
Craig, you talked about the lack of investment. There was a primary growth partnership fund that was targeted at Stronghold of multi-millions of dollars that wasn't from the farmers' back pockets for a transformational plan. Why are we continuously drawing up more plans now?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I mean, everyone knows that I've been vocal about it. I think that some of those primary growth partnerships out there need to be called out a bit and say, hey, where's the money gone, or basically stop it. And say, because the price of strong wool hasn't moved since the strong wool one has been in place. But it's really just looking at it and saying, well, why didn't it work? And I think one of the things that we've found, and it's definitely since I've been the chairman of the National Council, is that the wool industry is really working well together now. And that primary growth fund money was given to one company that was siloed out by themselves, and they didn't really include the industry. Whereas if you look another great initiative that's just come over in the last few months is the New Zealand Farm Assurance Program, NZFAP, which is a one on-farm assurance quality assurance program that all the wool industry is bought into. Now, within a couple of weeks, we had, and we're up to now 22 wool companies that are signed into this New Zealand Farm Assurance Program, because they all believe that being in the tent together, we've got a lot of power, But when we give money to one industry, one part of the industry, then it's siloed people, right? And it was never going to work. But now the New Zealand Farm Assurance Program, we've got exporters, we've got retailers, we've got merchants, we've got brokers, we've got wool scouts, we've got test houses, we've got brands like ourselves that are all joined into this because we believe that as one power, we have a lot more strength in numbers, and that's a lot what I'm really excited about, and I'm really proud of the wool industry to getting behind that and going, hey, you know what, we are in trouble. We are working well together. We get told all the time that when we don't work together, well, that's a straight out lie now, because we are actually all working together. And that includes farmers as well, the likes of Tom and the Campaign for Wool. So, that's where I'm really excited. My personal opinion, I think we need to, what the government should actually do is stop giving money to the industry and start buying wool carpets. I think that would probably be a better idea than anything, and really invest in it that way and say, let's mandate it. They did, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a legislation put through the other day around using timber only. Is that right? If they can do that for timber, why can't they do that for wool carpets or wool insulation? Maybe, Tom, you want to comment on that? That's
one of the projects that the Campaign for Wool is working on currently. So I'm actually strategising on how we get to Wellington and how we present a submission to the government exactly for that, to be able to legislate having wool carpets in Crown buildings. Yeah, it's interesting because I was at the field days last week, Sarah, and I bumped into, just by chance, the Green Party leader, James Shaw, and I introduced myself and we had a chat about wool for 20 minutes. But I was amazed that he, from what I could tell, I mean, he was very interested, but from what I could tell from his body language, he knew nothing about the situation for strong wool. And so I made it clear to him that we are in the process of coming to Wellington. And I think it would be very hypocritical of him as a real proponent of having a greener world and climate change, as well as the government. They talk the talk. There's a hell of a lot of talk about carbon, cars, trees, getting out of plastic. When we get to Wellington in a couple of months' time with our submission, I'll be interested to see how they go. We're asking them to all unanimously support us. To not do so, I think, would be very hypocritical, but it'll be interesting to see. But that's certainly one of the projects that we're about to embark on, and hopefully we'll be in Wellington with it within a couple of months.
Congratulations. Fantastic work there. And it's just, everyone collectively, as you said, Craig, coming together. And if anything, I do give kudos to Minister O'Connor for smacking some heads together, because, I mean, that didn't take money, did it, Craig? It's and it has had a fantastic outcome to that. But the thing is, too, and building on what you just said, the company that has been funded by the government to fix the strong wool problem maybe potentially has rested on the laurels of what worked for finer wool, that would be the same for strong wool. So we've talked around about in-shed management, the quality, turning it around from a negative, let alone, having the ability to take that levy and investment from the sector right through. But I'd love to hear from both of you how we can actually connect that consumer demand for sustainable lead products further back down the value chain. What are you seeing in both work that you do, Craig, with Divulge, right at the forefront of it from a clothing perspective, and Tom, your work with Campaign for Wool, that is positive science that is worth hanging on to breeding wool genetics?
It's interesting. I mean, I think one of the things that the strong wool industry has been guilty of is a lack of R&D. So we've largely rested on our laurels with regards to the flooring market. So largely we've been dependent on carpets and rugs as well. But I know from, just talking to retailers that I think 20, 30 years ago, 80% of carpets in New Zealand were made from wool. Today it's about 10%. So we've lost massive market share to synthetics. But a couple of real positives, and I would say, I mean, we've sort of talked a wee bit about how bad things are. I would really put underlights the fact that I am very optimistic, and I think for a couple of reasons. One, we're seeing a massive groundswell of consumers, and we're only just starting to see it in the last 18 months really take off with a movement away, protecting the environment, but particularly a movement away from plastics. And I think it was quite a major achievement when the supermarkets only 2 years ago threw plastic bags out of being able to take a plastic bag to the supermarket. And I think now it's a bit of a taboo if you went to the supermarket with a plastic bag. But but then we look at the flooring. So the average, I think, the average 3-bedroom house, if it's carpeted in synthetic or plastic carpet, that equates to 22,000 plastic bags in plastic volume. So we need to change the mindset there. Consumers need to understand that plastic or synthetic carpets are plastic too. And the other point I'd make is that we are starting to see, in the Campaign for Wool, have changed our strategy a wee bit with regards to our focus on supporting commercial entities. I mean, originally when I joined the campaign, we were a wee bit reluctant to get too close to commercial entities because we didn't want to be seen, we wanted to be impartial. But I've sort of led the group a wee bit more to say that, look, we're not just about education awareness, we're about selling wool. And to sell wool, we have to support commercial entities who are keen to get in. And I've got several examples of companies at the moment who are contacting us and wanting help with getting into wool. But a good example is maybe Big Safe Furniture that's been in the media a wee bit recently, based here in Napier. The McKim family, they're great guys, they're a very successful business, and they can see a movement from consumers into natural. So they've consciously made the decision to move their business into natural. So they're currently doing, and we had at one of their beautiful couches, Smithy, at the Wanaka show. So they're now making sofas out of wool. They're doing the same with bedding, and I know they've got aspirations to do stuff in insulation as well. So that's an example of a company that's moving into wool, and they're also moving into wool in not just the traditional product, i.e. flooring. They're moving into other products. And I think, this Campaign for Wool's job is to try and support more of that. And ultimately, to solve the problem, we need a suite of products, not reliant on flooring coverings. We need a suite of products that we'll go into. And if we can achieve that in the next few years, we'll start to see some huge demand for wool, I believe.
Look, and I agree with that too, Tom. And you only have to look at Bremworth as well, who, from a market point, they said enough's enough, plastics out, synthetics are out, we're going 100% wool, so you take that, and that's really big. That's a big ask for any company to, maybe give away 60% of their income, because 60 to, maybe 70% of their business was from synthetic carpets. They said, no, we're making a stand because our consumer is telling us that's what we want. And as a brand, a Norwegian clothing brand, we see that all the time. More and more people are going back up the mountains out. The sales have been good, but it's the younger generation too that are coming through, like the millennials are coming through. And it's really interesting. I've learned a lot over the last wee while as we're looking to launch our brand into New Zealand around Google and Facebook and just how you can really target people, and then you can break it all down. And a lot of our traffic now is coming from millennials, and they want to know about not just the product, but where it came from. How was it made? Is it sustainable? Okay, what does it mean? And this is where the wool industry got it wrong for so long, is that we got beaten up by the synthetic companies. Look, we just sat back and said, hey, we're wool, we're cool. Synthetic guys come up and they did rhino carpets, and they told this rubbish, absolute rubbish out there, because it's still plastic, right? And they're all trying to chase what wool does. And that's why I'm really excited about what we can do going forward, because no one's ever been able to replicate what wool can do. And so that's the greatest thing.
It's an interesting reading the Patagonia book and the journey, where they are now on that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what they do. They looked at that, and then they, and we've always got Patagonia again for a prime example. They were getting into wool, and then they had they got called out by PETA, the animal welfare people, after some videos emerged from South America, and they just stopped using wool altogether for a while. I said they're slowly getting back into now, but now they're focusing on recycling. Yeah, okay, but it's still not wool, like wool is the only thing that you can, it's growing on the sheep, you wear it, and then once you're finished, it goes back in the ground and comes back up as grass, and the grass eats it, and another jumper's growing again. It's so simple, and it just astounds me that strong wool is where it is, and even merino wool still fluctuating up and down all over the place. So it's but the strong wool, the only way is up, right? There's just no other direction wool can go. And so Tom and I and our teams in the wool industry here and globally are working really, really hard to make sure that we start changing the rhetoric. We start talking about the positives. Everyone goes, wool industry's in trouble. Yeah, it is. But imagine all of the great things that we can and are going to do with it. And it's, and the time for talking's over, and that's where I probably, the Campaign for Wool is doing a fantastic job, and the National Council is. But I think it's time for, like the government, they talk a very, very good green story, not only locally but internationally as well. Okay, wool's part of that story, and you need to jump on board. And one thing does make me laugh about the government when you're talking to them. They say the wool industry is all in silos and bits and pieces. Well, Tom and I have had conversations with Wellington over the last year, and they have no idea what each other's doing, whether finance or the education or the Minister of Ag. Like they're all in their silos up there, and no one talks to each other in that town. So it makes me laugh a wee bit.
Yeah, I think Sarah, one other point I'd just make, and Smithy alluded to it earlier. I mean, I'm reasonably new to the wool industry, I guess, apart from off farm. But and I certainly see it from my perspective as a farmer and the chairman of the Campaign for Wool, that there is a hell of a lot of really good stuff happening, and it's really been happening this year within the wool industry. So as Smithy said, there's some really great collaboration. And I think a lot of these guys have been in the industry for a long time. are really keen to do something different. They realise that it's that bad. We have to move in a different direction. I think the NZFAP thing is a good example, which Smithy and I have been working with others on in the industry. That's a really good example of some great collaboration. And really, to take this industry forward, we do need to have a strategic plan, and we do need a coalition of the willing. So those who are keen to see that vision and work with us, you won't get everyone, and that's fine. Some people may say no, they don't want to be part of it. But I think if we can put forward a compelling plan to the industry, I'm pretty optimistic that both behind the farm gate and beyond it, we'll get good commitment and we'll move forward. So it's exciting. I feel very optimistic.
Do you know what both of you have failed to mention? A group, and it's called the Stronghold Action Group, which has government funding, which is about a more connected, coordinated and forward-looking wool sector that's consumer-focused and embraces its place within the natural world. Can I please get from both of you, is this the silver bullet?
Sarah, I probably should say something first because I'm a director on the SWAG group. So, look, I've been a part of what the SWAG group is doing. Look, we are working hard. We've done some work in the US to get some consumer insights to understand what potential is out there for wool. So I think that's good. The SWAG group has also been working very closely with some of the very best companies in New Zealand who are being innovative for wool. So that's all good stuff. There's still quite a lot to be done in that insights out of the US work. So, look, let's see where that goes. I think, though, that what comes out of it, what the work that we're doing with the Campaign for Wool, as an example, we're looking to complement whatever comes out of SWAG. So we're working hard to produce something with SWAG, and whatever Campaign for Wool does, we don't want to be siloed and running off in a different direction. We're certainly saying to the SWAG group, and I'm in between the two of them, hey, we want to share information. We want to understand what you've got and show you what we've got. So collaboratively, we can move this industry together. So look, I would just make that point that SWAG is working hard in an area on what we can do with the industry. There's others like the Campaign for Wool who are also working hard, and it's important that we get our heads together and share what we're doing. And I think that's definitely the signals I've got from Minister O'Connor and the government. They have no interest in supporting an industry unless we can work collaboratively together. So it's really key point.
And just to add to that, the wool industry itself is really put a lot of money into SWAG as well, through the National Council and the brokers and the exporters and the scours and the test house and Campaign for Wool. We've all put significant amount of money along with the meatworks as well, because obviously the meatworks has slipe, and so they're all on. So we're all invested in this. From a National Council point of view, a lot of the stuff that's going in SWAG isn't being reported back to us yet because commercial sensitivities, and that's okay. But when it does come out, we'll support it because it's we've got a good movement going now. And you've got to remember SWAG is going to be closed up on Christmas Eve, so that's the life of SWAG as we keep getting told. So, a lot of that stuff is going to fall back to industry. And as a chairman of that, we need to be ready to go. We're all in the tent together. And, as I said, with stuff the campaigns for doing, NZFAP, it is really, really exciting. But we've got to get the strategy right first. There's no use putting a structure in place. And I suppose that's one thing that, SWAG is there was a structure put in place without, on the back of the PAG report, I think it was, the one before SWAG, and then to come up with a strategy. I think what we're doing and the campaign's doing is let's come up with a strategy first and then get, the right people around the table and make the decisions going forward. But whatever SWAG comes up with, it's great. Like if there's little bits and pieces come out of it, that's fantastic. And maybe is it the silver bullet? It's going to be part of the armory going forward for the wool industry, because not one little group is going to be able to do this on their own, Sarah. It's got to take an absolute collaborative approach from everyone in the industry. And that's what excites me, because we've got enough willing people there at the moment. Okay,
so I can hear Christmas Eve, all of these cheers screeching as everyone exits backwards out of the Stronghold Action Group. What does the table look like? Who needs to be sitting at it? Is it a revised wool board? How do we continue to actually see out the strategy? And who do we look to for the continual direction post-Christmas?
I do think, look, the SWAG board have talked about that, an enduring body, and that's part of its mandate is to work out what is the enduring body or what not to take the industry forward beyond December when SWAG is looking to finish. So, yeah, we're working on that now. We've already started talking about that sort of stuff. One of the key points, though, that I'm really keen to see is that before, as Smithy said, there's got to be strategy before structure. So we need to work out what is our strategy first. That's a really key point that the Campaign for Wool, and me as chairman and Smithy as fellow director on the Campaign for Wool, we're really keen. You cannot decide a structure until you've got your strategy. So I think there's kind of two teams really for me. First of all is getting a team together, and it's getting the right people. It's not necessarily, we sort of have coined the phrase, getting the right brains, not names. So we need the right people around the table to create the strategy. And I mean, independence to the wool industry is good. I think you've got to have some involved with it to know what it is, but you need some independence too to really look at it and build a strategy. And I think that's the first bit. Once you've got that, then you'll need a team, an enduring body to be able to deliver that strategy. So I see there's two parts to it. There's an initial team to create the strategy, and then there's another team that will be, dare you call it a wool board? I don't know what you call it, but you do need a governance group to deliver on that strategy. And it needs to be communicated. It needs to be transparent, especially if everyone's contributing to it.
Craig?
No, look, I've got nothing, no further comments on that. I think it's exactly right. And then enduring body, but it's got to be made up with, people that are doing it for the right reason. And sometimes I don't believe, the people are doing it for the right reason. The right reason is to make sure that the wool industry has a future, and as us as consumers can buy wool products, because at the moment, we do a lot of marketing and stuff and education around wool, where then people go, where can I buy a product? Oh, we can't buy it, right? And so that's kind of one of the things, and it's one of the great things that Tom and the Campaign for Wool are doing is, even just within New Zealand, there's a lot of little wool companies, even here in Wanaka, there's Wilson and Dorset, and then there's other yarn people, and they're all little wool companies trying to strive to be bigger and better within wool. But we've got to build a community where we can all get together, and that's what's happening. So when, we did a great thing, Campaign did a great thing with the Architects Institute in New Zealand. They did a webinar for 100-odd architects, I think, Tom, it was on there.
About 300.
About 300, sorry.
Webinar, yeah.
And part of their personal development, they had to sit there and they listened to a webinar on wool and wool in the built environment. So there's, okay, now, and there they're going, okay, that's great. Where do we buy wool insulation? Where to buy wool carpets? Wool, so we've got to have this whole strategy all tidied up in one little place that we, the toolbox, I'll go and talk to this person, or here it is here, or here's your options. Instead of working in silos. And this is the whole thing about, the strategy, pulling it all together so there is a resource sitting there. And the enduring body going forward has to include industry people because that's, our livelihoods. But it also has to, but that's after the strategy's been made. Once again, there's no having a structure if you've got no strategy, because then you're just wasting money. And
Sarah, I'd probably just add to that we're not talking about yet another bloody report. I mean, there's been so many reports written on the wool industry. I'm certainly not advocating for another report. It's ridiculous. And I also am an advocate for not reinventing the wheel. So look, I think we've got to be honest and open about it. I mean, I think New Zealand merino is an example. Merino is only 10% of volume of we produce annually here in New Zealand. But I think New Zealand merino have done a good job in many ways, if I look at it from a marketing perspective. So I think we'd be naive to ignore that. I think we should be looking at that and what can we take from that. I mean, I also think we should look at Aussie. They're only across the ditch. What are they doing there? They don't have a lot of strong wool, but are there things that they're doing in Aussie that we could possibly do? And I think we would be naive to not look, at some of these other companies, or for that matter, anyone else, in the commercial field that's doing stuff with wool to give us ideas. So, we don't want to be bloody minded about this thing. We need to learn from others and not reinvent the wheel if we can avoid it.
And can I just make a suggestion on another bloody report, which was very good, was the Nuffield Scholars Insight Report in the last year when they travelled around New Zealand, and the ability to have true transformation. We have to be comfortable to self-disrupt our own industry, and the people that we bring around this, yes, can be representative of the stakeholders within that industry, but the best people to self-disrupt are, as you said, Tom, from outside looking in, and that's what I will be keeping a very close eye on the type of people that do come around that table, that are from completely unique parts of the world and see things differently.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot with our strategy. The problem is if you get people with too much of a vested interest who are involved in the strategy, they're too close to it. So the temptation is that they will screw the scrum to benefit themselves. So you do have to have some real, and that's why I mentioned before, I think, yes, it's good to have people within the industry, but it's also just as important to have independence to look at it frankly and openly and honestly. And that's certainly our view as far as the team we would need to get together to be able to build the strategy.
And to leave you with this, I had an interesting conversation with an extremely bright-minded young woman who's doing a master's at Lincoln University. And she said, the first thing I couldn't work out is why don't you have a sheep industry association? And I thought, very valid point. It just shows how far we've come, and that fragmentation is starting to rebuild and come back together around that, because, if we can't fix wool, then where does the sheep disappear to, as it forms part of the revenue on farm? So thank you both so much for your incredible, enduring passion that you do every single day on behalf of the best fibre that is in the world, wool. I really genuinely mean it, because those who are fighting in the trenches when it's in the state that it is right now deserve Victorian Cross in my mind. And I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of sheep farmers across New Zealand in saying that. Have you got any last parting words, and what would make your job easier?
Well, I think just and parting, I keep going back to, we do have the best fibre in the world. And I don't think we've seen the best of wool yet. And that's what excites me the most. Don't give up on the wool industry. Don't give in to the selling farms and planting trees for carbon credits. Wool is too, the value, it's that valuable to us, globally. Just don't give up, because we will get there. And it's the last thing Tom and I do. We will get this wool industry back up and running, and it's going to take time, and we're going to do it properly.
And Sarah, I'd probably just endorse what Smithy said. I think the risk to the industry, the immediate risk, and I certainly feel this as a farmer, and I talk to a lot of farmers, and the general sentiment is that, we might give it a couple more years, and then we'll seriously think about whether we carry on growing wool. So I think the threat to move to trees or beef farming or grazing or wool shires that don't produce wool is a real risk to the industry in the short term. So I endorse what Smithy says. I think the key thing message we're trying to get to farmers at the moment is there is light at the end of the tunnel. I know you haven't seen it yet, but we're working very hard on getting this together. And once we do, I certainly personally, as Campaign for Wool chairman and as a farmer, quite happy to do a roadshow around New Zealand and talk through what we're planning to do. So just hang in there, bear with us. I know it's tough. I share the pain too. At $1 a kilo net cost, it's really hurting our businesses. But I think the opportunity for wool is massive. So hang in there.
Thank you so much for a country built off a sheep's back, and to the fact that we're absolutely hanging on to the last string of it. But the positivity is there, as you've just heard from Tom O'Sullivan and Craig Smith. Thank you, gentlemen. Well, how was that? Congratulations for those that have sat through, both watching tonight online as well as on demand on podcast. So much to take in when it comes to our challenge of the price of strong wool in New Zealand. The key message that I took out of that was, if you can, hold on to our sheep farmers in New Zealand, a key message. But we all know the pressures that are coming, and it has to stack up and be financially viable. now, if not in the next 12 to 24 months. So where to from here? I'd absolutely love to hear from you watching or listening on your thoughts from what you've heard from our guests on our Opinion Maker show tonight, or if you are watching again, as I said, on demand on podcasts. Please send me an email, sarah@sarahscountry.com. I'd love if there's any suggestions on wool innovation, unique business models where we can redesign the wool industry. And as we talked there earlier with Andy Caughey, I mean, we can look back to the past for some learnings, but at the same time, this is a whole new world that we're operating in, and there's some great ways to do business differently, self-disrupt the wool industry and what it has been to date. But at the same time, how do we keep optimism alive within our sheep industry to that wool will have its day, and it is just around the corner. We see those trends with global consumerism walking over to natural fibre like they should have decades ago. However, the time is nigh. It is coming soon. Sarah@Sarah's Country, you can get in touch with me. Now, before I give you a heads up on the topics and guests we have for the rest of this week, and next week's Opinion Maker topic is also a goodie, I just want to let you know around a mechanism I have for you to keep in touch with what is coming up in advance before anyone else. And also, if you don't keep up with social media, you've decided to ditch Facebook, that's cool. We've got an email goes out every Sunday. It's called Sarah's Country Club. And it'll tell you what you've missed so that you can keep up to date. Of course, everything is on every podcast platform across the globe where we do reach a lot of you across the globe. So please give us a subscribe wherever you're listening on podcasts as well. Now, our changemaker tomorrow is ag researcher Seth Lawrenson, where their Curiosity Fund has enabled them to dive down a rabbit hole about how the SCOBY that's in kombucha could potentially lower the alkaline levels, the pH levels, my apologies, in dairy effluent. Very cool stuff. Can we scale this up? And the future of dairying in Canterbury, what does that look like? I do dive into that with Seth Lawrenson, as well as on Friday. James Denton is the co-founder of Good For, a whole food refillery based here in New Zealand, which is scaling up considerably. But it has a majority of imported organic arable products. Why can't we highlight the great work and provide a great circular feedback loop from our consumers to our growers to harness the premium of conscious consumerism? I've got this great concept, if you don't know about it, called Sarah's Country Sisters every fortnight, talking to a variety of voices within the primary sector you may not necessarily hear from. I actually have two sisters, Katie and Sarah Vickers. They hail from an upbringing in Marlborough, and Katie is the head of sustainability at Farmlands, and her sister Sarah is a holistic nutritionist, both on a mission to see nutrient-dense food be a huge part of our strategy for New Zealand going forward. And as I said, our opinion maker next week is a goodie. The topic is, how do we reduce bobby calves economically? As featuring a friend of mine, David Williams, who has built a business model about how to achieve this. And following his presentation at the recent South Island Dairy event, and Dr. Sarah Bolton from Across the Ditch has done her Nuffield scholarship in this area, as well as the lively, bubbly Julia Jones from NZX's head of dairy analytics for her idea around the ethics of bobby calves and how New Zealand needs to move quickly. All that up here on Sarah's Country next week. You can tune in at 7 p.m. on Facebook, YouTube, and at sarahscountry.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. In the meantime, take care of yourself and your loved ones. Haere rā.